This is the case of the people of the state of Colorado versus James Egan Holmes, case number 12 CR 1522. The record should reflect that Mr. Holmes is present with his attorneys, Mr. King, Ms. Spengler, and Ms. Nelson, and the people are represented by Mr. Brockler, Mr. Orman, Ms. Pearson, Ms. Stitch McGuire, and Mr. Edson. We are set today for the final sentencing hearing. Before we start, let me just remind everyone in the gallery that this is a public proceeding, and I want everyone to feel welcome and comfortable here. That is very important to me. As I have mentioned before, this is your justice system. You have every right to be here. Some of you in the courtroom are victims. You have a constitutional right to be here and to speak at this hearing. However, I ask that you please observe courtroom decorum. I'm sensitive to the fact that this case may evoke powerful emotions. I fully understand that. I have not prohibited emotional reactions. To the contrary, I have recognized that most visible emotional reactions are inevitable and are appropriate. What I ask is that you follow the following rules. Number one, please address all of your comments to me. You cannot direct your comments to the defendant or to anyone else. Number two, please make sure that your comments are professional. You cannot swear or use improper language in the courtroom. Number three, if you read something, please read it slowly so that my court reporter can take it down. There's a tendency sometimes when we read things to go faster, and that makes it difficult on the court reporter to take down what's being said, what's being read. Ms. Martin needs to be able to take down everything that is said, and so please, if you're reading something, just be mindful of that. Number four, please wait for your turn to speak. You cannot speak or make comments from the gallery. And number five, please start your comments by stating your name and spelling your name. So if you would please tell me who you are and then spell your name, I would appreciate that. With one exception, by someone who is not involved in this case, there have been no issues from anyone in the gallery throughout these proceedings. I thank you for that, and I ask that you please continue to conduct yourselves in the same fashion. Please remember that it is my duty and responsibility to defend and uphold the authority and dignity of the court. All right, with that, let's get started. The way I would like to proceed is to have the prosecution go first, and I'll leave it to counsel whether you want to make statements before you allow some victims to testify or after they speak to the court, or both. You can do it so that you make some comments beforehand and some comments after they have had a chance to speak. Then we'll move to the defense, and we'll proceed in a similar fashion. I'll give you a chance to speak if you want before you have anyone address the court on the defendant's behalf. And also, if you want to do that after the comments are made, I'll let you have that option, or if you just want to address the court either before or after comments from people who want to address the court on the defendant's behalf, you can proceed in that fashion as well. Okay? Is there anything preliminarily that we need to discuss before we start? Mr. Brockler?
Separate argument from each side. Build that into that.
I think you can build it into your presentation, and if I have any questions, I can ask you questions.
And so the argument for appropriate ultimate sentence.
Yes. Yes. Is that okay with you, Mr. King?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
May we approach on a couple of very brief issues?
Yes. All right, and just a reminder, if counsel would please use the microphone when you speak, so that way people in the overflow rooms and people following the proceedings through the broadcast can hear what you're saying. That would be great. Okay, Mr. Brockler, are the people ready to proceed at this time?
Sir, we are.
Okay. Would you like to make some comments before you ask some of the victims to address the court?
Your Honor, I'd like to make whatever.
I'd like to make whatever argument and comments I'm going to make at the conclusion of all the statements that the victims will make.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, and I understand that there are a lot of victims who wish to address the court. I have not placed any limits on the number of people who address the court, nor have I placed any limits on the amount of time that each person takes. So, Ms. Teach-McGuire, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. The people call Christian Cowden.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Doing okay, thank you.
All right, could you tell me your name, please, and spell your first and last names?
Christian, Kristian. Cowden, Cowden. Start.
Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Christian Cowden. I'm the eldest daughter of Gordon Ware Cowden, one of 12 victims slain in the Aurora movie theater shooting. The following victim impact statement is a testament to the gross inadequacy of words, as there is no human language that can convey the pain that I have witnessed seize a hold of my family, or the pain that I have personally experienced and continue to experience every day of my life as a result of the pointless tragedy that is homicide. Over the last 3 years since my father was murdered, I have learned a lot of unsolicited information about the depths of anguish and the nature of grief, such as that there are many layers of grief, transient yet categorical. The first layer is that of a wholly selfish grief for my own loss, pain that comes from the inability to talk to my dad, confide in him, laugh at his jokes, ask for his advice, or sit and talk with him about life like we used to do. The pain of knowing that our friendship cannot continue to develop as I move into adulthood, that he won't see me finish my Peace Corps service, and he won't be there to walk me down the aisle. Then there is the grief I grieve for my family, for the pain that they feel though I'm not capable of fully perceiving it, and for the damage the loss of my father has done to our family. I can only imagine the suffering of my loved ones and feel the desperation and grief of knowing that there is nothing I can do to alleviate that suffering. It is the secondhand but equally devastating pain that I felt when I saw my 16-year-old sister leave a box of my dad's favorite ballpoint pens at the foot of a white cross, when I watched my grandfather bend down weeping over the grave of his youngest son. The same suffering I feel when I think of how my sister preserves the smell of my dad's favorite t-shirt, tightly rolled in a plastic bag. I grieve for the terror that my sisters experienced that horrible night of the shooting, for the nightmares and the fear. I grieve for and rave against the cruel sense of guilt experienced by two young people who wish that they could trade their lives for the life of a beloved father. Then there's the grief of knowing that 11 other sets of loved ones are experiencing a similar, equally profound heartbreak as that of myself and my family. It is a pain I first felt seize me when I found myself at a gathering of dazed victims' families in the library of Gateway High School about 14 hours after the shooting. A man I had never seen before in my life shakily stood and said that he couldn't bear to think of his little girl lying on a dirty movie theater floor. When I heard his voice breaking, so did my heart. for him and for everyone else gathered in that room. I cannot fully comprehend the experience of those who lost their children, partners, siblings, but I am grief and horror-stricken at those unfathomable losses. In my experience, the most haunting pain I feel is the grief I have for the now voiceless dead. I have grieved for my dad, for his absence from the world. I am disturbed by the repetitive realization that my dad is no longer sitting at his desk in the front room, listening to music and working on his computer, cheerfully taking clothes out of the dryer, browsing among books at the library, or sitting and pensively smoking a cigar on a lawn chair in the backyard as night begins to fall. I have grieved for the cruelly stolen time that he could have lived. I still can't believe that he couldn't be there to see his two youngest daughters graduate from high school, or to mourn the death of his Alzheimer's-stricken mother. I still don't want to believe that he won't be there in the future to hold his grandchildren in his arms, to support his family through the thick and thin of life, or to simply continue living and enjoying each day into old age. Every time I think of my dad, of my family, of the other victims, or of my own fatherless self, I am flooded anew with these dark tides of incomprehension. I cannot describe to you the innumerable hours that I have wept, or the horror and heartbreak that seize me each time I think of how I will never get to see my dad again. Not even to hug him one last time and tell him how much I will always love him, how much he will be missed but never forgotten. I wonder at the man who killed my father and 11 other innocent, unsuspecting people. It baffles and sickens me to think that this one man could so quickly, efficiently, and pointlessly create this profound absence and indescribable pain for so many people. On the other hand, this capacity of a single man, thank you, excuse me. On the other hand, this capacity of a single man to inflict so much irreversible damage is ironic because him being only one man, there is no way for him to experience or comprehend the abysmal depths or the breadth of the agony he has caused. We each know and connect with our own sentient reality, but because we lack the ability to inhabit someone else's self-aware mind, we must make an effort to recognize how equally real and profound the lives of our fellow human beings really are. I wonder at Holmes if he had forgotten about or simply rejected this realness that is the lives of others. I wonder if, in the planning and execution of this grotesque violence, he chose not to conceive of his victims as self-aware beings who had histories and loved ones and hopes and fears, just as he does. These last 3 years since my dad was murdered, I have wondered time and again what could have happened had I had the opportunity to intercede before Holmes committed such a horrendous crime. I would have thrown my arms around him and begged him to listen to me. I would have told him about Gordon Cowden, a man who I had loved my whole life, the best man I have ever known, and a wonderful father, friend, hero, teacher, and inspiration to each of his 4 kids. I would have told him about my dad, the storyteller, the man who loved to read and go grocery shopping and to make people laugh. I would have told him about the games my dad played with us while we were growing up, and about how often our family went for walks together in the park, about how if a song he enjoyed came on the radio as we were driving home, my dad would sit in the driveway, to listen to the end of the song before getting out of the car. I would have told him about the kind of loving, attentive father my dad was, and about how he told me once that after he died, he wanted simply to be remembered as a good man. I would have made him see just how accurate yet inadequate the word good is to describe my dad. I would have told Holmes about how much my siblings and I loved and treasured him. How lucky we were to have him. And about how my dad was likewise a beloved son and father and brother, I mean to say that I wish that before he had committed this unforgivable crime, I could have made Holmes see how real my dad was. Gordon Cowden, a dedicated and loving father, a happy, healthy, vibrant man who valued his life, who took pleasure in and appreciated the small things, a man who gave kindness and consideration to other human beings and still had so much life left to live. The real man with real children and real siblings and real parents and real friends, all of whom loved him and still love him, and whom have felt and will forever feel his loss as an empty, unfillable space where reality recedes into memory and leaves a pain so profound the actuality of it can hardly be conveyed. On the back of my dad's tombstone, we inscribed the phrase, "You loved us into being." My sister came up with the idea from the quote by Fred Rogers. All of us have special ones who loved us into being. I knew and loved my dad my whole life. And his love molded my reality. There is nothing I can say or do to make Holmes or anyone else comprehend the suffering that I, my family, or the other victims' families have experienced. I think it is often difficult for the judicial system to fully acknowledge dead victims because while the perpetrator's life is imminently real by its living, thinking presence, the realities of victims that no longer exist in the present are diminished. And the only testament to their existence is the anguish experienced by those they love. This grief in its many layers, though heavily felt by the sufferer, is merely an abstract noun that cannot be adequately represented in a courtroom. My hope is that anyone listening to this or reading it in the future will remember that my father was a real man. Even though he is no longer alive to bear witness to this reality, and even though my words cannot do him justice, I can testify that he was a real man with a real complex, beautiful life, because his love and presence in my life made me the woman I am today. Thank you.
Ms. Cowden, thank you. Ms. Stitch McGuire?
Brooke Cowden.
Good morning.
Hi.
Tell me your name, please.
Name is Brooke Channing Cowden. Brooke. Cowden, Cowden.
You may proceed.
And I'm Gordon Cowden's daughter. My words are inadequate to document and map out descent into pitch black perennial midnight. There is nothing to say to answer senselessness. I subjected him to the death that should have been mine. I wasn't supposed to survive and am not supposed to be alive to have an experience and reaction to describe. The most valuable words I have are those regarding Count 4, but it hurts to acknowledge that he is gone. It hurts to remember what I'm forgetting, and the defendant doesn't have the right to witness the life he slaughtered. And Count 4 was reduced to and decided to death rather than a life based on the rules of court anyway. I could elaborate on drowning in pain and sadness, temptation to inhale and succumb to the dark around me, about debilitating anxiety, seething anger, unanswerable confusion, loss of trust and basic sense of safe, infinite what-ifs, insufficient efforts to protect others from the firestorm in my head and therefore from the defendant, becoming lost to myself and not believing in my personhood, abandoning my dad, desolation, aloneness, guilt, fault, selfishness, blame, responsibility, accountability, and consequences. But my survival is burden enough to endure. Torrents of my pain and reaction have dissolved relationships, so I'll outwardly adhere to and speak emotional silence and facades. Thank you to those who responded to manslaughter in a black box, and to the individuals who have offered relief in quiet company. When I try to relay my thanks to Lisa, she rebuttals that she thanks us and we shouldn't have to thank her, that she's sorry for the circumstances to begin with. But lives were stolen and the wreckage is definite. The compassion, strength, understanding, inexhaustibly supplied to us have eased even if just slightly the situation. Always with thanks to the first responders, victim advocates, individuals who let us borrow phones, those who assuaged a complete aloneness, a community that demonstrates resilience and support, Lisa, court staff and volunteers, the prosecution team, mental health professionals, puppy handlers and therapy dogs, the human being who knows and unconditionally accepts, hopes and fights for me, and each of the 24 jurors who, in my opinion, should be provided mental health counseling by the court.
All right, thank you. Just a reminder to slow down when you're reading. I know that it's difficult, but do your best to slow down when you're reading statements, please. All right, Ms. Tisch-McGuire, call the next person.
Your Honor, if I could, there have been a number of victims who have provided written statements, but they've asked that those written statements be given voice. And so from time to time, the court will notice in between victims themselves, members of the prosecution team, as I am doing here, will stand before you and read those statements.
Okay, you may proceed.
This is a statement related to Jessica Ghawi, who he murdered by shooting her in the head with a rifle, the court may recall. My name is Benjamin Ghawi. Homicide victim Jessica Ghawi is my sister. I'm Jessica's brother. I'm 15 years old. Ever since that terrible day, I've always been different and have never recovered from this tragedy. I always think about her each and every day and think to myself, quote, how can there be so much evil, pain, and hatred, end quote. Jessica had a hard time struggling to find a path that she wanted to go down in life, but then she had it all together. She wanted to be a news sportscaster. This is what she wanted more than ever, and she put a lot of time, work, and effort into this career that she was pursuing. Soon she was on television, interviewing and talking to people. One of my favorite moments was when she was on the ice skating rink, interviewing a hockey player, because she was in high heels and was unaware that she would slip and fall on her butt many times. Every time I see this video, I just feel sad. But every time I hear her laugh and see that smile on her face, it just makes me feel better. It seemed like she had everything together, but then it went downhill from there on that night in July. The next morning was probably one of the worst mornings of my life. Even though I'm not a morning person and I hate the morning, this is one I would never forget. As soon as my parents told me what had happened, it seemed like life stopped at that very moment. I then felt something snap inside of me. I just ran into my room. Forgive me. Falling onto my knees, crying out in prayer, asking God to listen to my tears and wails of sorrow and depression, hoping that she was still alive. I stayed in that room for hours, praying, crying, yelling, waiting until news came to us that she was still alive, but then later the phone rang. And I ran as fast as my legs could carry me. I listened intently to my parents talk to the person on the phone. As soon as I saw that it was all over, I had the worst temper tantrum I've ever had in my life. As days went by, all our friends, neighbors, and family came over and supported us in every way they could. Days turned into months, and months turned into years. And during that time frame, I've always been asked the question, quote, how could this be God's plan? Why did he take my sister away? End quote. She had a bright future ahead of her, but all that came to an end. Over the course of the years, I've been thinking and praying. One day I was reading in my Bible about the story of when Christ was on the cross. One part stuck out to me, and that was when he said these words, quote, forgive them. During this time of pain and suffering, he still forgave the Roman soldiers who were trying to kill him. And I thought, I am like Christ in a time of my pain and suffering. But he still forgave the people who did the acts of evil, and I thought maybe I should forgive the man who killed Jessica. The Bible even says, quote, love your neighbor as you love yourself, end quote. So ever since I saw this in the Bible, I forgave the man who did wrong. Not only does this make me feel better, but also the simple things in life, like the apple tree in our front yard. Every time I eat one of the apples, it reminds me of how sweet she was. Another example is when I go to Six Flags and ride on the roller coasters because it reminds me of Jessica. She loved them and had no fear. Even though she's gone, I know she's in a better place in heaven with Jesus. So that's why I love to look up at the sky and just think of her. But of all these things, I have taken into consideration the best thing is to have faith, hope, and most importantly, love. Benjamin Ghawi. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bruckler. Ms. Stitch McGuire?
Thank you. Commander Mike Daly.
Good morning, sir.
Michael Daly, D-A-I-L-E-Y. I'd like to thank Your Honor and the District Attorney's Office for this opportunity to address the court. I'm speaking on behalf of all of the members of the Aurora Police Department, civilian and sworn. First, I'd like to say we continue to grieve and support the families of the 12 murder victims, as well as all of those who were injured or impacted and survived the attack. I'm a commander with the Aurora Police Department, but on the night of July 19th into the 20th, I was a lieutenant in charge of the department's SWAT team. I was on duty leading the department's summer task force. When the attack at the theater began, I became a first responder to the theater along with my brothers and sisters. One of those other officers was my own wife. We realize that nothing our officers experienced that night can compare to the pain and devastation still being experienced by the victims of the attack. So the following statements are in no way intended to diminish their suffering. Sorry.
That's okay.
Honoring the court's order, the police department has remained silent on a response to the attack, as well as its aftermath. But finally, I'm able to tell the world that the officers who responded that night have also suffered because of this attack. Much like combat, the officers who arrived first at the theater were placed in the chaotic scene of people running for their lives, others wounded, screaming for help, and finally encountering the dead. All of this while receiving conflicting reports about suspects and locations. Our officers had to improvise. We were not only hunting for the suspect, but we realized we had to deal with the wounded and dying people. In an unprecedented move, officers transported victims to the hospitals in a life-saving effort. As the situation unfolded and information became clear about the attacker, officers then worried about secondary devices and booby traps in and around the theater. Information gathered revealed that the suspect had booby-trapped his own apartment. Now the police department was dealing with two different crime scenes. One already experienced death and injury. The other held the potential for further devastation. In the following hours and days, the rest of the department became involved. In one way or another, in the investigation, officers were placed on 12-hour shifts, detectives worked continuously interviewing witnesses, and our own victims' advocates undertook the enormous job of assisting all of the victims from the very beginning. I want to paint this picture because, to say the least, our first responders were subjected to nothing less than the trauma of war. The images of that night are still haunting. For the investigators, the officers, and the victims' advocates, and the civilian staff, the continued exposure to the sorrow and victimization of the families has had its toll also. Members of our department suffer from a number of problems: depression, alcohol abuse. We have marital problems going on, and mental and physical health problems, all attributed to this event. Our officers and staff continue to receive counseling for an event that is forever seared into the memory of many of us. We know from prior events such as this that we will continue to see effects of this event for years to come. We are anticipating further and ongoing issues in the department, including the possibility of suicide by our own officers. I can't drive by the theater without hearing the fire alarms going off or smelling the tear gas. I still have images of hurt and wounded people leaving the theater, hundreds more in the parking lot in shock. I knew that my wife had also responded to the call. It would take me over an hour to confirm she was okay. I would later learn she drove some of the victims out in her patrol car twice. When we finally were relieved at 10 o'clock in the morning, I drove us home. We're both still in shock. I then took her gear out of my car and washed the blood out of her gear bag, her jacket, and her hat. Blood from the victims who were rushed in her car to the hospitals. I share this because I know we're not the only ones who experience this. Your Honor, I could continue all day with stories of silent suffering from our department, but I think the court knows there's no way to accurately describe the devastating effect this crime has had on the Aurora Police Department. On a personal note, I've thought about the fact several times that my team of officers was working in the area of the suspect's apartment when the attack began. Had his plan developed as he had hoped, I know that many of my officers, and possibly myself, would have been killed in that explosion that he envisioned. So for the officers and the firefighters, I thank God that plan did not come to fruition. I believe the only regret this murder has is being caught. He shows no compassion for the victims or the families. I believe he thought he had created the perfect plan. He didn't count on the brave men and women of the Aurora Police Department responding so quickly to end his terrorist plot. In my eyes, he's nothing more than a monster who needs to be banished from sight forever, to be forgotten, to live a life in solitary. I hope he knows every minute that he's hated. He needs to know that when he finally leaves this earth, no one will care. I hope that every day is painful for him. I hope that prison is not kind to him. Yes, Your Honor, there's other things I hope, but you would find them improper here. When I walk out of this courtroom, I will continue to remember the victims and their families. They will always be a part of me for the rest of my life, as will my brothers and sisters in blue. As for the monster, I hope prison gives him his just rewards. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Commander. Ms. Stitch McGuire?
Megan Sullivan.
Good morning.
Good morning. It's Megan Sullivan, Megan, Sullan, Sullivan. Your Honor, in the interest of the court, I want to briefly state the effects that James Holmes' criminal actions had upon me. My name is Megan Sullivan, or Megan Sullivan Jenks, since I recently got married. And I'm standing before you to share how the murder of my brother, Alex Sullivan, has greatly affected my family and I. Alex believed that life needed to be lived and every experience had to be made the most of. He enjoyed every moment of every day. And as my brother, he was my first best friend. He was there to guide me through life's difficult experiences, as well as make me laugh when I got too serious. Life without my brother is not what it's supposed to be. Since I was a child, Alex was with me to celebrate the best moments of our life. But Alex was not there at my wedding to dance with me to celebrate. We will never have a proper family St. Patrick's Day or Christmas ever again. I will never have nieces and nephews that belong to Alex. And most of all, with the loss of my brother, I've become an only child. And I am the last of the Sullivans when I was never supposed to be. The loss of Alex can be felt every day for my family and I. Navigating a new family dynamic has never been more difficult. Before, we knew our roles and what we played, and now I am given more responsibility than I ever was supposed to. I grieve for when Alex is not here, but I mostly grieve for when he was supposed to be here. When it comes time to take care of my parents as they get old, that responsibility is in my hands, as opposed to sharing it with my brother, as it was supposed to be. Since the death of Alex, I find myself wondering about the last moments of Alex's life. The constant barrage of what-ifs in my head is unbearable. My heart aches knowing that he had no warning and no time to prepare and was unable to say goodbye. With the loss, with the trial, it has made Alex's loss more real. Like sitting in the courtroom and looking at photos of Alex's dead body, trying to make sense of things that were being said. I find myself going over every aspect of Alex's death and how my life has been affected, and often at night I can't sleep. Grief, anger, confusion, sadness, anxiety, loss of friendships, all of these are aspects of surviving the senseless death of my brother. It impacts my ability to sleep, feel comfortable in social situations. It doesn't matter where I go, but I can feel the unbearable loss of my brother. And there are very few people that understand and accept what has happened to me. There's no replacement for my brother, and no amount of justice will make up for the loss of him. Every July 20th, I will not only celebrate the life of my brother, as it was his birthday, but I will also mourn the loss of him. My life will forever be changed because my brother was murdered. Alex Matthew Sullivan is my brother, a son, a husband, a friend, a comic book fanatic. He was a very loving person that gave the best hugs. His future was stolen from him. He will have no more birthdays, and he will always be 27 to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Orman?
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm going to read a statement by Andrew Price, the brother-in-law of John Larimer, who requested that this be read in court. John T. Larimer was my little brother-in-law. However, he didn't accept me just as an in-law, but accepted me as a true brother when I started dating my wife, Anne, over 17 years ago. I was fortunate enough to have someone so amazing like John as part of my life and family. No one could ask for a better brother, friend, and family member. One unforgettable trait John had was his ability to recall random trivia knowledge. He truly was an encyclopedia of random knowledge. He would hang out with his siblings, Noel, Beth, Ann, and Nora, as well as his parents, Kathy and Scott, while playing Trivial Pursuit. He was so smart and witty that they would give him a couple of handicaps to even out the game. First would be everyone against him, just him. Second would be requiring him to fulfill 2 entire pies. And lastly, to have me on his team to slow him down. John truly was my sail and I his anchor in life until the worst day occurred that has now scarred me forever and will always haunt me. July 20th, 2012. I can replay that entire day as a broken record clip in my head like it was yesterday. I was listening to the radio in my car, and the news poured in describing a mass shooting at a midnight showing of The Dark Knight Rises in Colorado. I was shocked and appalled that someone would do such a horrible thing. A little later, Ann called me indicating John was at the showing and no one could get a hold of him or knew where he was. I started panicking and told myself that it wasn't possible that John was at the theater. I kept saying to myself that John was at work and okay. Every time I processed a different scenario of why John wasn't answering anyone, it came back with the same conclusion that John had to have been in the theater and was one of the 12 killed. It made me sick to my stomach and completely lost that I was never going to see John again. All I could do was search for some glimmer of hope that he wasn't in the theater and that I hadn't lost my little brother. The time came when we found out that John was in fact murdered. That night, I did hold my wife and daughter as tight as possible and console the rest of my family as best I could. I watched my life being flipped inside out, and that I would need to be as strong as ever to get through this horrific tragedy caused by the defendant. I had to watch my parents bury their son, my wife and her siblings bury their little daughter. These moments of grief will forever haunt me. Since losing John, there has been a void inside me that will never go away. That night, my sail was ripped from me. I was lost and resorted to internalizing all my emotions to the point where the daily quality of life deteriorated. It took me over a year to finally seek help, the help of a therapist to assist in repairing my life that was filled with anger, depression, and anxiety after losing John. Every day, I have to stay focused, keeping my mind busy and constantly distracted. Otherwise, my thoughts wander back to the horrific details and images of the defendant killing my little brother John, 11 others, and injuring countless more. I didn't sleep much at all a couple of months immediately following the loss of John. I am still unable to get quality sleep and frequently wake up during the night thinking of John and how I'm not able to talk to John again or replay the horrific details of what the defendant did to John and everyone else. The defendant murdered many innocent lives and attempted to murder so many more. But for some reason, his life was spared. And now he still has the right to life. He still has the right to visitations from his family and friends. John was murdered because of the defendant, and now I don't have the right to see or talk to John ever again. I won't ever have my normal life back again, and I have to live with this so-called pseudo-norm life because of the defendant. The defendant's crimes warranted the maximum sentencing, the death penalty, because of killing 12, injuring 70 plus, and attempting to murder even more wasn't sufficient. What would it really take? However, the defendant's life was spared for some reason, and now the court should provide the next maximum sentencing. The defendant's attempt to murder as many people as possible justifies the sentencing to include the maximum number of years as possible in prison. Providing the maximum number of years possible in prison would be the next best thing in providing justice for me and my little brother John. That's the end of the statement, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Ms. Stitch McGuire?
Bill Hoover.
Mr. Hoover, good morning.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is William Hoover, William Hoover. I'd like to thank you, Your Honor, for the opportunity to say a few words in honor of my grandson. My name, I go by Bill Hoover, and I am AJ's grandfather. I'll make this as short as possible. Nothing I or anyone can say can ever replace him in this family or in this world. He is the spark that holds this family together and is still with us in our hearts. During his brief life on this earth, I tried my best to act as a sort of surrogate father to him. Any job, no matter how small or large, I'd ask him to help me with it, whether it be mowing the lawn, painting the deck, installing backsplash in the kitchen sink, helping me with my computer, and Lord knows I need all the help there I can get, or just sitting down and talking. I no longer have the chance to indulge in that honor. He even started me listening to classical music when driving. He said it will keep me calm, and it worked. We'll get by without him in our midst, but nothing will ever be the same, nor do we expect it to be. We will survive, as we're all survivors. But all we have to hope for now is that one day, not too soon, we'll be able to join him and his grandmother. I personally would like to continue my life on this earth without ever hearing the name of that person ever again. If there was some way to erase it completely from my memory and from history, I would. And if that statement offends anyone, I'm sorry, but I'm not very politically correct. Finally, I'd like to offer my and my family's sincere thanks to the court, to the prosecution, and especially the jury, even though I disagree with their final decision, for their hard, diligent work on a task that is difficult beyond comprehension. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Hoover.
Teresa Hoover.
Good morning.
Good morning. Teresa Hoover, Teresa Hoover. My life has been changed forever. My eldest son's life has been changed forever. My entire family has been affected tremendously. From me to my 3 brothers and 1 sister, AJ's 16 cousins, and numerous other family members throughout the country, not just Colorado, we have all been devastated by this. We are a large and very close family, and none of us will ever be the same. AJ was a young man on the brink of the rest of his life. He had found the love of his life, decided what he wanted to do with his life, and was due to go to orientation for college at the Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design on July 21st, 2012. He was to start in August, so he literally had the rest of his life to look forward to. He was going to be a ceramics teacher, wanted to own his own studio, wanted to get married, and many other dreams like young men his age. I have always been the single mother of 2 sons. I can't think of one of my sons without thinking about the other. Each day I start over remembering that AJ is never going to be a teacher, a father, a brother, a godfather to his cousin again. I will never be able to see him reach his goals. I will never hold his child. I will never be a grandmother to his children. He is not there to make me smile and laugh each day like he did growing up. I continue to go to counseling to help with this struggle. I fight being depressed and lost continually. I have to remember that I have another son who relies on me being here for him in his future. It is impossible to describe this feeling of loss. I am missing a limb. I'm missing half of my heart. I could not live in the house that I raised AJ and his brother in any longer because of the constant reminders of his life being cut short by this selfish being. AJ's brothers struggled to come down from college and spend the night in the house. So I decided to sell the house in 2014 and move out of the neighborhood in hope of healing. I continue to live in Aurora and struggle with seeing Gateway High School. AJ had just graduated from there months before. He played baseball on that field for many years. We used to go to the football field to watch the fireworks on the 4th of July. And of course, the worst day of my life, I spent 18 and a half hours at that school waiting to hear that my son was murdered in the theater. Both of my sons grew up in Aurora, as did I. So everything I see, from a McDonald's to a baseball field to my parents' house to my sister's house, everything is a constant reminder of my murdered son. Emotionally, I struggle every day. I continue to go to counseling regularly, but words cannot describe this pain and emotional turmoil. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Pearson.
Your Honor, I'm reading a statement from Rita Polina, who was an attempted murder victim. To whom it may concern, I am writing this letter to express what I am going through up to this day from the time that I got shot at Century 16 while watching Batman. I underwent multiple surgeries that had caused me a lot of pain and discomfort up till now, especially during the cold season. I am now unable to perform my daily activities without any pain or discomfort. I try to maximize my strength as much as I can to be able to work, so I would be able to support my son, who is now in college. Even though I am in severe pain, I don't have a choice but to do my job to earn a living. I am now having a hard time standing up for long periods of time due to a gunshot wound on my leg, and I'm unable to use my arm for the same reason. But in order to live, I have to bear the pain, and the pain is back again. Because of my injuries, it has already affected the quality of work that I do. My co-workers have been supportive of me, but as a worker, I have to think that I am still capable and uplift myself to be able to perform as how my supervisors expect me to. There are times that I go home crying while driving, thinking, why has this happened to my family? We are God-fearing and would always try to do good to others and do what is right in the eyes of God. I am not questioning God, but the effect on me and my family is really traumatizing. I went to a stage of depression and felt helpless. Due to this incident, my family stopped going to a movie theater, and every time we hear a loud sound, we all get scared, and what had happened to us a few years ago all comes back fresh in our mind. A very good example was the 4th of July when we heard all the fireworks. We all just stayed in our room and prayed that nothing bad would happen to us. There are all times that I would start shaking and my heart would be beating fast when I hear any loud sound that I would think is a gunshot. All we could do is just pray that God will keep us strong and help us get through the trials in life. I am sharing this experience to find justice for all of the victims. We deserve the justice that is due for us after all that we have been through and the effect of it in our lives up to this day. Sincerely, Rita Polina.
Thank you. Just a reminder, folks, to please slow down when you read statements. All right, Ms. Tisch-McGuire?
Lisa Childress. Looks like she left the courtroom. Dave Hoover. Oh, sorry, thanks.
Mrs. Childress, good morning.
Good morning. I already forgot the directions. Judge some more.
That's okay. You can just tell me your name. And
Lisa Childress, Lisachildress.
Thank you.
I am the mother of Jesse Evan Childress. This is a picture that I look at every day. It's right by my door, by his shadow box with his medals and awards that was presented to us by the Air Force. And it also, of course, helpful, hardworking, adventurous, creative, humble, and accepting of themselves as well as others. They grew up, each of them serving in the military, and each acquiring additional higher education and degrees. They loved each other, competed with each other, in all areas of life, looked after each other, supported each other, and laughed with each other. On their last day in Manitou Springs, Colorado, all of these attributes were evident to me, their mother. Little did any of us know this would be the last time we would give each other a hug, and only 2 of our sons would be here today. Jesse is no longer here. Every day when I get up, I see my son Jesse's pictures, his medals, honorary coins, Broncos jersey, hats, framed flag that was flown over Afghanistan in his honor, his memorial flag box from his military funeral, and final resting place, Fort Logan National Cemetery. I try to focus on his light that he showered on the world, focus on his positive attitude by looking at his framed photo, this one, smiling in Ireland with a basket of fish and chips, his recently purchased Guinness shirt on, and his thumb is up telling me, "You can do this today, Mom. Face the world." I often wear myself out trying to always be positive, help others with their own struggles. And so sometimes I retreat, collect my thoughts, cry, listen to music that reminds me of my eldest son, and try to recover that way. I try and energize in a positive way, I think, by watching sports that I would share and talk about with my son. Broncos football games, of course, UCLA games, LA Clippers games, LA Kings games. But sometimes these reminders of good times turn into sadness and loss, knowing that there will never be another conversation with Jesse on the phone, via text, via email, or in person. I try and remember his smiling face, laugh, and hugs. Sometimes he would give me a pat on the head, and "It's okay, Mom" face, especially involving computer issues, because he was much better at it than I am. My son Jesse influenced his brothers immensely, and they have continued their education and completed furthering their careers with new jobs in the military. Sometimes Jesse was doing something Jesse was doing at the time of his murder by the defendant. His life was cut short at 29, and he had worked a full day for the Air Force, bought tickets for his friends and coworkers, ate, laughed, and wanted to just spend time watching a movie, a superhero movie, which he loved. But then shots were fired, and he had to respond, and he was our superhero, gone too soon. An intelligent, witty, humorous, generous, influential, responsible, athletic, adventurous, brave, gentle, patient, loving, humble mentor who touched so many lives by merely being Jesse and caring, taken by someone who failed to have this final attribute, caring for his fellow human beings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dave Hoover.
Mr. Hoover, good morning.
Good morning, Your Honor. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Hanging in there. Just trying to get by. My name is William David Hoover. Last name spelled Hoover. First off, I'd like to take the moment to thank the court for the way in which this case was handled. It didn't go unrecognized. It was professional and respectful. I submitted a written statement to the court. In addition to this, however, I wanted to share these thoughts as well. I want it noted again that the court continually admonished the witnesses and victims that they needed to remove themselves from the court if they felt an outburst coming on. None of the victims or family members of those that were murdered by the defendant interrupted these court proceedings. This is because each and every one of us knows how to follow the rules, the laws of this court, and those of society. The defendant does not. I've been a police officer for over 32 years. I'm a sergeant with the Lakewood Police Department. It breaks my heart to see my fellow brothers and sisters, the Aurora Police Department, suffering. None of my experiences could ever prepare me for the pain that was caused by AJ's murder. I am one of 5 children, the second oldest of Bill and Sue Hoover. I'm Teresa's older brother. My heart breaks every day for her. She is the mother of AJ Boyk, and AJ was murdered by the defendant while doing and being where he should be on July 20th, 2012. AJ was my nephew and my friend. I'm going to just share something about my father. He's a modest man. Put himself in harm's way for his country, and at one point was shot down over Vietnam. Learned a valuable lesson from him and my mother. My dad came home after being shot down. We had a family meeting, and he'd been there for a few days. He told us something that I've never forgotten. I can't do my job without each of you doing your job. You have to take care of each other. You have to watch out for your mother. Listen to what she tells you. You have to take care of each other. Be there for each other. Always remember the question that is asked, am I my brother's keeper? And the answer he always gave us was yes. We all must remember that we are in this together. This is the rule that many of us in society understand. We understand that if we violate the rules, that we will suffer the consequences, and others get hurt by our mistakes. The defendant deserves the maximum sentence that the rule of law allows. AJ and his older brother Will were raised by my sister Teresa as a single mother. Because of this reality and our family's commitment, we have had a lot of influence on these boys' upbringing. I had discussions with AJ about his responsibility as a young man. He listened and he learned. He grew and was developing into a responsible young man. He was sweet, kind, and funny. My wife, Lori, was always happy to see AJ, would bend over backwards to help him in any way. AJ was a great kid who gave more than he received. Lori loved and cared deeply for him, and she has suffered a great deal because of his murder. He was helping out at our home before he was murdered by the defendant. He did yard work to earn money so he could go to the movie that night. AJ was our daughter's best friend. They talked or texted daily. They grew up together and were very close. The pictures that you see on the screen before you are those of AJ, various stages throughout his life. AJ had a love of life and others. He had a smile that lit up a room when he bounded in, sharing the life within. These are the moments that we as a family cling to remember what we have in this world and not what we've lost. We cannot hug or see AJ anymore. He was taken away from us. He died with 11 other beautiful people in that theater that night when the decision was announced that the defendant was not going to be put to death. I watched his parents walking towards the elevator and his dad smiling, and he laughed. Probably because his son was spared the sentence that he carried out on our loved ones. He tried to kill everyone in that theater that night, and luckily was not successful. All of them and our families have to carry on with the pain and loss because of the defendant's action. It was argued that the defendant committed these acts of heinous violence because of his lack of self-worth. Well, as a result of his actions, he has no value to this world. All we can hope is that the defendant does not have a long life in prison. The defendant will suffer in prison, and I hold no pity. No sentence will bring AJ back or our loved ones back. But all must know that if you commit these crimes in our society, you will be held accountable. When we're finished here today, our family will walk out into a beautiful day, hopefully minus the haze. We'll enjoy some fresh air and something the defendant will never again, and should never again enjoy, and that is sunshine and freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Tish McGuire?
I have a statement that Cassandra Sullivan, who was the wife of Alex Sullivan, asked us to read. This crime changed my life in so many ways. I wake up daily without the dreams my husband, Alex, and I had together. I am no longer able to watch and help him succeed in anything and everything he could imagine. And I no longer have his support in each decision I make in my life. Alex is no longer there to share the good, bad, and ugly moments in life. I now have to take care of our beautiful dog alone because unfortunately Alex never comes home anymore. Some relationships I had with people faltered because it is so incredibly hard for someone to understand exactly how hard days can be for me without Alex. There is no way to explain to anybody what it is like to grieve the loss of your husband and that it's really hard. The only things I have left of Alex are the memories we made together, the rings he gave me symbolizing his love for me, our adorable puppy and photos. Those things will be enough. I quit my job because of the shock and grief I endured after losing my husband. I moved out of our house. I had to uproot my entire life because I no longer had my husband. I no longer had my husband there, and I was so deeply and directly impacted by this crime. Due to this crime, I have found myself more stressed than I ever was before. I have severe anxiety in places I used to feel safe. I freak out when I hear sirens. I find myself struggling to get out of bed some days because I am just overwhelmed by emotion and grief. I am jumpy and untrusting frequently because I can't get the impact of this crime out of my head. I frequently find myself trying to avoid my birthday because I lost Alex on his only 10 days before mine. Unfortunately, there is nothing that can truly repair the loss of my family, and everything I have experienced due to this crime. Time and counseling are the only things that will even begin to ease the pain caused from this senseless crime. Thank you, Cassie Sullivan.
Thank you.
The people called Kathleen Puso.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Kathleen Puso, spelled with a K, A-T-H-L-E-E-N. Last name is P as in Paul, O-U-R-C-I-A-U. First, I would like to express my gratitude for the opportunity to make this statement on behalf of my daughter, Bonnie Kate Puso Zogby, and the whole rest of my family. Many of us may be acquainted with bearing grievous injustices without an interested audience or carrying on in silence for years concerning wrongs done against us. In contrast to that, it's a privilege I welcome to be able to make a statement about just a few of the ways that we have experienced and believe we will continue to experience the effects of that awful night a little over 3 years ago. However, before delving into that, I would, at this point, like to comment that while I do sincerely appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I do see some personal value in being able to do so. It's still my opinion that it would be far more helpful to make this statement before the sentencing is done, when it would seem like there was a chance it could have an actual impact in that area. It's not clear to me what the value of these statements are in terms of the judicial process itself coming as they do after the trial and sentencing are essentially complete. Nevertheless, I offer this in hopes that it may perhaps there is some value to it from a judicial standpoint, even though I don't fully understand it, or that is hidden to me. That raises a second preliminary comment related to the actual sentence that was issued. You have given a person a sentence that, for all practical purposes, seems absurd. I don't know what the average lifespan of a person or a man in prison is, but to issue a sentence that outlasts the lifespan of the person being sentenced by a factor of 10 or even 15 or more, it seems pointless. Why sentence a person to 1,000 years? That's Bonnie Kate. We made a swing for her because she couldn't stand for the ceremony. I don't know if it just showed Max carried her down the aisle because it just hurt too much to walk. But so why not 1,000,000 years? It seems to me that given a person a preposterous sentence does not multiply the effectiveness of the sentence. It just makes a mockery of the justice system that applies it. It really is the judicial equivalent of beating a dead horse. If someone could explain to me the value of insanely long sentences, that would be helpful. Is it supposed to make the victims feel better? It doesn't. It seems to communicate that the sentence that's given is not adequate, trying to add to something. Never one possessing much brevity. My statement is a tad lengthy. Even so, believe me, I condensed it. Because of that, it may be helpful for you to have a large-scale roadmap of where I hope to go. First, I will discuss the impact of that the shooting has had, particularly on Bonnie Kate, but also our entire family. Following that, I will speak some about our hope of eternal redemption for their defendant, as well as our disappointment concerning his lack of remorse. I'll speak about the inadequacy of the sentence and the process that led to it, and finally wrap things up with the conditions we would like to see placed upon the defendant. I really do appreciate you bearing with me as we plod through these things. Thank you. All that being said, let me share some of my thoughts on the impact of these events on my daughter, myself, and my family. The series of emoji-like faces used in hospitals to assess a patient's pain range from an expression of happiness, an absence of pain, to contorted faces expressing excruciating agony. Have you ever seen those? The pain chart, 0 to 10. While they might have some usefulness in some circumstances, they aren't always very effective in describing a person's pain. At least that was Bonnie Kate's experience. Me trying to sum up concisely how this horrific crime impacted my daughter and our entire family is a task I know I don't have enough words for, or the right words. But I'm willing to give it a try. I feel like my words will be a little like that inadequate pain chart, and thus lacking in many ways. Nevertheless, I press on. Now, in case the details of what happened to my daughter are a little fuzzy, let me start off by reminding you that Bonnie Kate was hit with a bullet and shrapnel from an AR-15 fired by the defendant. It lodged in her left leg, and she sustained very significant injuries to her tibial plateau, her knee joint, her femur, her popliteal artery, and also, unfortunately, the nerves in her leg. Here are a few pictures that depict some of her situation then. I guess we'll just be going throughout. Kind of put a lot of them in there. Bonnie Kate has had 7 surgeries, many with grueling recoveries, and has more of that to face in the future. To give you an idea of what it's been like for her, about a year ago, she went to see her surgeon in the hopes of finding some relief, any relief, from the pain that was just constantly ravaging her. She felt like she just couldn't go on any longer. and was so hoping for some good news about pain relief and being able to return to previous activities, like simply walking without agony. The report we received left her and her husband and me just weeping in the doctor's parking lot. Our heads and our hearts all spinning with the report that really it wasn't going to get much better, if at all. He just looked us in the eyes and said, no, it's just going to get worse for you. You're going to get older. Things are really, your meniscus is already worn out. It's going to get worse. Quite the opposite. It's going to get worse. It was after this that it hit us that this was not just a difficult season for Bonnie Kate. This was not something that we would endure for a number of months or even a few years, but things would get better. And eventually we would one day look back on this nostalgically. No, the dawning, sickening recognition was that this was her life. And it was going to keep on being her life for the foreseeable future. This was not going to be a temporary feature of her life, but an abiding, defining characteristic for her. Pain. Constant. Always, always, always there. Never really letting up. Always this noise in the back of her head. Nagging, stabbing, stinging, firing, throbbing, aching, screaming, pain. But not just pain. There were limitations, and there are limitations as well. Everything had changed. And what was worse, those changes weren't going away, as I said. Every activity she was brave enough to tackle would be followed up with amped up pain she would have to endure. If she had the courage to dance at a wedding, she would be punished by her leg or body for days afterwards. Sadly, by which I mean we have cried until our bodies are limp and worn out from the grief of it. But sadly, this has been precisely what we've seen. She pays dearly for just about anything she wants to do. Nevertheless, and despite paying a great price for any and all activities, thankfully, Bonnie Kate continues to choose to dance. Even if she lets Max, her husband, scoop her up for each of much song. She continues to choose to ride a bike, even if it means being back on crutches for the rest of that week. She continues to choose to be up on her feet, serving everyone else, cooking in the kitchen, up. She keeps on choosing to keep on going. Thank goodness. And more than that, I thank God. It's clear that the defendant meant harm, deadly harm, to hundreds of people. He intended evil. In the story in the Bible of Joseph, who's sold by his brothers, of all people, to be a slave, he expresses his thoughts to his brothers about the whole thing years later when he's no longer a slave. He's actually a ruler. He forgives his brother and tells them, you intended this for evil, but God intended it for good. That's how we feel about Bonnie Kate's injuries. The defendant intended it for evil, but God is using it for her good. Certainly not as any of us would have scripted it, but we try to entrust ourselves to the one we can trust. Bonnie Kate has responded to these hardships with strength from God. Through her weaknesses, He is strong. She's clung with stubbornness to an eternal perspective and the sure hope of a day without pain and without limitations and without profound sadness about the brokenness of this world. He has given her faith, evidenced most days by a determination to live in an other-centered, gracious way. During one particularly horrible time in the university hospital, I overheard her praying, please give me acceptance with joy. And she continues to struggle with all her might to hold fast to a life that submits to a bitter providence with joy. When you see Bonnie Kate, it's easy to assume that she's doing pretty well. She beams, smiles, genuine smiles, liberally and consistently. She wears flowers in her hair just about every day. She responds to questions about her well-being by saying, I'm okay, hanging in there, And she admits the struggle, but she really tries not to let it define her. It'd not be difficult at all to assume she's dealing well with all her distresses. But as her mother, let me tell you, her smiles don't always come so easily. They are born out of a desire to make the most of something that often feels like a nightmare. She decides to smile with sincerity, and she resolves to get out of bed and persevere. It'd be easy to belittle the effects of her injuries because she bears them with such grace, but don't. Her beautiful, sustaining strength from God doesn't take away from the horrific and the vile nature of the crime committed against her and so many others as well. He meant it for evil. God is using it for good. Bonnie Kate was helped out of the theater by Chris Lakota. When he came to visit Bonnie Kate in the hospital, he reported to us seeing the murderer after he had already shot her in the leg, pointing his gun at her again. And then thankfully, the gun jammed. The gun jammed. How ironic that because Bonnie Kate is a surviving victim in this case, she has been able to indirectly speak life to the man who wanted to kill her. Because the gun jammed and her life was spared, she and I, her mother, have been able to speak about God's eternal life and mercy offered to broken, sinful people like ourselves and the defendant. Of 7 close siblings that really do adore her. And as such, how do you measure the impact of this crime on a family? Honestly, I don't know the answer, of course. I do know that this tragic example of the brokenness of this world has landed heavily upon every one of us. A couple of my 7 children were swept into profound and troubling and scary sadness after the events of that awful night. There simply wasn't an area of our lives that wasn't drastically altered. Every endeavor, school, sports, social interactions, everything was affected. Early on, when she was stable enough to be transferred back to a Baton Rouge hospital, her siblings were glad she was home. But the impact of all that had happened hit each one of them in unique ways. Some of Bonnie Kate's siblings held her hand and prayed and sang and cried, and others were so undone by her agony that they simply couldn't go in her room and see it. For example, one night when none of the meds could touch her pain, this happens all the time. And she was begging God to help her and begging that the overpowering pain wouldn't let up for hours upon hours. Noah, who was 15 at the time, held her hand most of the night. He heard her constant full-body sobs and her cries to God, and she would pray for mercy and for relief, and then break down, reduced to disappointing grief and tears when no relief came right then. And she would say, okay, I'll trust you, God. I'll trust you. Noah confided that he had never felt hate like that before. That he didn't know what to do with this grief and this anger, and he wanted so badly for the person who made his beloved sister suffer this way, to be brought to justice. He couldn't help but want that he could do it. He was seething with anger, and hot tears just ran down his face. And while he was stunned by the intensity of his emotions, he was surprised by something that he heard Bonnie Kate whisper. It was a prayer that she was saying just to God about the unrelenting and extreme nature of her pain. It made her think that hell must be something like what she was feeling, that it felt like more than a person could bear. And it wouldn't stop. And her thoughts of hell made her think of the defendant. And she was moved with pity for him. She wanted him to find mercy for his soul. And she whispered, God, please have mercy on James Holmes. And smack dab in the middle of one of her worst nights, she really had a lot. And she still does. This is what she said. Noah overheard her prayer for mercy, and it interrupted his prayer for justice. Both prayers are right, in my opinion. But what does watching someone you adore suffer so horribly do to you. There aren't enough children have spoken about losing their sense of optimism, about being far more fearful than they ever were before, about feeling emotions they'd not experienced that way before. Max, you see him right there, he's wonderful. He's 6'4", he's a huge guy. He loves her desperately. He feels like he's always on the alert now. I think he has more PTSD than she does. He's always on the alert. Everywhere he goes, he's looking at doors. He's looking for a way out. He's looking for a shooter to come in. He just wants to be ready. He wants to protect her. He loves Bonnie Kate marvelously well, and he constantly deals with grief while he watches her struggle and grimace and break down because of her many hardships related to her injuries. This crime impacts their marriage daily. And sleep, which others have mentioned, which is so often an escape for us, feels like a very dangerous place to Bonnie Kate. Her nights are so often filled with terrible visions of horror and all the accompanying emotions associated with feeling like she's reliving awful things. So when she wakes up, it's all so real. And how terrible that the simple relief of sleep has been so miserably tainted by this tragedy for her and so many others. More recently, one of the more grievous things for Bonnie Kate to respond to was the look in the defendant's eyes when she came to Colorado to testify. Was there sadness or brokenness or remorse? Far from it. There was a smirk. And there seemed to be smugness. And the look of a person who had no grasp whatsoever of the magnitude of his crime or the offensiveness of his person being this way. His actions sent so many families, including his own family, spiraling in deep distress and dumbfounded by intense sorrow and the bewilderment of such a crime. How we had all hoped that he would show deep sadness for his actions and seek to express grief and regret to his victims and their families for how he had hurt them, and more than that he could be rescued from facing eternal consequences for things that he should face earthly consequences for, and that he would trust in God's great mercy to him in Jesus, and that he would be a man altogether changed by grace. How we had hoped for that. And how sad to see nothing at all like that. We long to see that bondage broken and that evil darkness and those oppressive clouds lifted. The thing is, we've felt clouds of sadness over us since this crime, but light shines in the darkness, right? It's where you see it. We've seen it. So how do you measure the profound sadness of watching someone struggle with things the rest of us can do effortlessly? How do you measure the emotional trauma associated with being severely injured and involved in a massacre? How do you measure the effects of knowing that a student turned killer pointed a gun at your daughter and shot her? And then aimed again, and his gun providentially jammed. How do I know the ripple effect of that heinous night on my kids? I don't know. Is it measured in a sentence of hundreds of years or thousands? I don't think so. I know the impact on us has been profound. We are forever altered because of the defendant's actions that night. We are altered, but thankfully not destroyed. In preparing this impact statement, we were given some guidance to help us know what sorts of things would be helpful to talk or write about. One of the questions we were given was this: what could be done to assist in repairing the harm done by this crime? May I just interject? I appreciate, that question being asked. And I appreciate the whole atmosphere of this court and the respect and kindness that's, from what I wasn't here much because we live far away, but it's been consistent throughout this case. But so that, I appreciate that question, but before I want to respond to that, I want to clarify again that I'm speaking here on behalf of Bonnie Kate, but not as Bonnie Kate. She didn't have the emotional reserves to be here and come here today, which is just another effect of this crime. But there are things that she could say and should say if she did, so I'm here as her advocate, her mouthpiece, really. And I'm genuinely sorry for you that you're missing hearing directly from her and her dear way of talking and just being. I won't be able to fully represent her in that sense, but it's the best I can do. So, returning to that question, I want to say that for me and for my family, there's actually a better question that seems to go to more directly get to the heart of the issue here. The revised question we would like to respond to is this: what could be done to assist in repairing the harm done by the handling of this crime? Let me try and explain. When we returned to our home in Baton Rouge from the trial in Colorado, my youngest daughter, who is pure joy to me, all bound up in a 9-year-old's body, she asked what decision was made regarding the defendant. Mommy, are they going to let him live or die? What are they going to do? What did they decide about the man who killed all those people and tried to kill Bonnie Kate? And when I told her that no decision had been made yet, she looked at me with distress on her adorable little scrunched up face, and she said, with her fingers on her temple, she said, I don't know how to think about this. And I understood that. She'd been hearing our family praying for the killer to know forgiveness, but she'd also heard expressions of our desire for justice to be served, and she shared those desires. It's not something easy to reconcile for 9-year-olds or for anybody. To some, the notion of wanting both forgiveness and justice for the same person, it seems contradictory. In the Bible, there are numerous examples, however, of people who get just that. People who do terrible things and are forgiven by God and are not spared the natural consequences of their actions. Their eternal disposition is secure in Christ, but they are not therefore delivered from the temporal or earthly outworkings of their choices and actions. And in saying these things, let me be clear. I don't consider myself as needing the mercy and grace of God any less than anyone else, including the defendant. I too am a moral failure, and I look for mercy and forgiveness for my sins that will secure me to Christ in this life and the next. And yet I'm not surprised to discover that I reap much of what I sow in the here and now. The difficulty expressed by my 9-year-old was recently echoed in Bonnie Kate's response to the defendant's sentence. Bonnie Kate had been in Lebanon visiting her husband's family. She called me, it was actually 2 weeks ago now, I guess, the day after the sentence was announced at 1 a.m. her time, and she was sobbing. She was shocked and surprised by the sentence, and also by her own response to the sentence. Why was Bonnie Kate sobbing at the news of the sentence? Because while Bonnie Kate and the rest of our family have honestly and earnestly prayed for the defendant to know God's forgiveness and mercy, and we've spoken publicly concerning this on numerous occasions, that didn't mean that we thought it was appropriate for him to escape what we thought were more fitting earthly consequences for his actions. Now again, someone looking on as an outsider to these events might question Bonnie Kate's response. Well, didn't she care about the killer's well-being? She spoke about it. Didn't she want him to not only have the peace and joy she'd found, but to live long enough to experience it? Didn't she and all the rest of our crew pray for his forgiveness from God, even as we announced our own forgiveness of his actions against her? Wasn't our stance toward him one of mercy? Yes, that's all true, and it wasn't a performance. And let me just add, forgiveness toward the defendant has not been a one-and-done sort of thing. We've all had to go back over and over again and learn how to keep forgiven every time we feel the destructive effects of his actions. And I won't pretend that's an easy thing to do, but we keep trying to do it. We forgive because that is what we've been taught and what we believe. We forgive because we've been forgiven, and because the only alternative to forgiveness is that you're forever held hostage to your bitterness and anger. In other words, when you don't forgive, you never stop being the victim. So what was going on with Bonnie Kate that night? Was her deep sadness over the sentence an example of anger and bitterness being played out? Certainly that would be a response all of us have to consistently fight against, and one we are fully capable of giving into and actually fail at restraining ourselves from far too often. But I can honestly tell you that that wasn't the primary source of her sorrow. And she told me, as she caught her breath from crying, that she'd never felt so much emotional pain. Why? I'll tell you. It's because when justice isn't served, there's a brutal message that's delivered to the victims of someone's callous disregard, as well as a host of tragic ongoing consequences for society. When a punishment doesn't fit the crime to which it's attached, the message to the victims is that your pain, your loss, it's not really all that important. When the defendant in this crime was given a life sentence rather than a death sentence, the message that came through to Bonnie Kate, and possibly to every other victim of this crime, especially the families of those who lost beloved family members, but the message was this: the life of the defendant is worth more than the lives of the 13 lives he took, and the many other lives he permanently damaged. The message was that the state of Colorado values the life of a mass murderer more than the lives of those he murdered. When the punishment isn't a fitting response to a crime, we recoil. We know this from our earliest days. Who doesn't remember making lots of protest about that very thing when, as a child, you saw someone else get away with something for which you were severely punished? We instinctively know that these things are not right and that the books have not been balanced here. Examples could be easily multiplied. A father and his sons are brutally attacked and their bodies are riddled with bullets. All three of them are killed in a jungle in Brazil, and the murderers, some of them boasting about their deeds, are rounded up and spend only a handful of days in jail. Outrage is the appropriate response, right? That's my father's story.
Ms. Puso, I'm sorry to interject.
I'm
I need
almost
to
done.
figure out when to take a break.
Okay.
How much longer do you think you have?
Not much at all.
Okay.
I'm almost done.
All right.
Thank you for letting me continue. On a playground, a young defenseless child is brutally beaten, and the teenager who leaves him gasping for breath in a pool of blood, unable to move, gets a meaningless slap on the wrist and has his cell phone taken away for the next week. Again, what's the gut feeling? Outrage. And the opposite situations cause the same sense of injustice. Think about the people who were sent to prison, sometimes for years, because in their hunger and desperation they stole a loaf of bread. Does the response seem appropriate in that situation? Of course not. Again, from our childhood on, we know all these things instinctively. The punishment should fit the crimes committed. Bonnie Kate felt like, when it was all said and done, the murderer's rights were the rights being protected, not hers. She felt like the sentence didn't adequately address the heinousness of the crime. She felt like the sentence was a message that clearly exposed a massive disconnect with what should have been the consequences of the gunman's actions and what the consequences actually were. In her sadness and anger and confusion at the news of the sentencing, these sorts of questions were running through her and our minds. Why? True story here. Can a person breaking into a house and who kills someone in Colorado get the death sentence, but a mass murderer doesn't? A murderer who had his gun not jammed would likely have killed more people than he did, maybe hundreds. And in killing 13 people, including the unborn child of the pregnant woman who was murdered, doesn't warrant the death penalty. What does? How many people do you have to kill to get the death penalty? 14? Or 20? Or 100? Where's the tipping point? And why do you even have a death penalty if you aren't willing to use it? A death penalty that is never used has no deterrent effect. It's an exercise in futility. And what signals does this send to Bonnie Kate and the other victims? We care, but not that much. And what signal does this send to society? That the lives of our citizens do not matter as much as the lives of those that threaten them? What does this say about the value of a human life? That we're disposable? And what signal does this send to the next person out there who's contemplating a similar crime? Will this sentence actually embolden others to imitate the defendant? What is the deterrent effect of this sentence? Well, Bonnie Kate's conclusion is not much. I agree. Only recently there was another theater shooting about an hour away from our home in Baton Rouge. And did the perpetrator of that crime know about the outcome of this trial? I don't know. But my assumption is that if he did, it made his actions that much easier to commit. Those and other questions are the consequence of the manner in which this case has been handled, and ultimately and unsatisfactorily resolved. Let me say it again, while my ultimate hope is for mercy for the unjust in the next life, in a world here that is broken, to allow injustice is to breed and invite further injustice. The next most hurtful thing you can do to a victim after the crime itself is to show by your response that you've not taken the harm done to them seriously. When the perpetrator is seen to have more rights than the victim, discontent, disillusionment are sure results, among others. My personal stance on this particular situation became so much clearer after I considered more fully Bonnie Kate's justifiable reaction to the sentence, as well as the effects on society. Victims and their families have now been traumatized twice, once by the defendant and now by a justice system that seems to regard their lives so lightly. One further question we were asked to consider was this: are there any conditions you would like to see the court impose on the defendant? Well, yes, there actually are. I would not impose as much as I would hope that the defendant would grasp the magnitude of his crimes and that he would feel genuine remorse, and that this remorse would lead to a change of his heart, and that he would know God through his Son, Jesus Christ. I would like for him to have access to my words here. I would like to know that while he's in prison, he's not allowed to access violent games or TV shows or internet sites, etc. He should not be rewarded with free access to gratuitous violence, whether real or imagined in any form, or to any other input that will only further degrade his already clearly warped view of human worth and dignity. And on the contrary, I would like to know that he was given access to things that might cause him to value human life, including his own. And to consider the possibility that there is a God, and there is ultimate justice, and there is a Redeemer, even for mass murderers. I'm anxious that I left out something at the very beginning that a paragraph I may have shot over. But I don't know if I mentioned that we're grieved so much for all the others who lost family members. And our story could be so different. Our family grieves, and I probably said it better than I could say it now, but I think I bumped over that part when I was trying to get through this. So anyway, thank you for letting me speak, and thank you for letting me speak so long.
All right, before we take a break, let me respond to a couple of things. I think it was Brooke Cowden who suggested that the juror should be offered counseling. I just wanted to let everyone know that that has happened. That happened on the last day of the trial. Court services offer counseling to the jurors, and some of them may have been interested, some of them may have not, but that was offered. That's number one. Number two, let me address some of the things that were just said by Ms. Puso, because I think they're based on, in part, on ignorance of the law and the system, and in part, perhaps, on misinformation. It doesn't sound like she followed the proceedings closely throughout. She mentioned that she wondered what the value of the statements is after the trial. The jury was not asked to sentence the defendant on all of the counts related to the surviving victims. The jury was asked to decide what is the appropriate sentence with respect to the 12 murders. That's the only thing the jury was asked to decide. I decide what sentence is appropriate for all the other counts. So with respect to the count that involves Bonnie Kate Puso, it is I who has to impose that sentence. That's why the statement is being made now, because it's a statement that I can consider and that I will consider in deciding what sentence is appropriate. In terms of whether it is a mockery of the system to have hundreds or thousands of years, or whether that's supposed to make the victims feel better, again, that shows perhaps some ignorance. The system says that the defendant must be punished for each and every crime that he committed. And if he committed as many crimes as he committed in this case, he has to be punished for each and every one of those crimes. The jury found him guilty of all the crimes that he was charged with. I have to punish him, impose a sentence for each in every single one of those crimes. The alternative would be to say, well, we're going to punish him for one crime but not for the other. How would victims feel if that was the system? That alternative would be worse. And so the fact that it adds up to hundreds or thousands of years is not because we're supposed to be making the victims feel better or because it makes a mockery of the system. It's because he has to be punished for each crime that he was found guilty of committing. And if that adds up to hundreds or thousands of years, then so be it. If that adds up to 12 life sentences, then so be it. But he has to be punished for every crime. In terms of there being no justice, if you set up a system in which justice depends on the result and the outcome, you set up a system that is impossible to meet. Our system of justice is not based on the outcome or the result. If it was, then almost always somebody would be able to say, well, you see, I didn't get what I wanted, therefore justice was not done. Even within the group of the victims, there would be disagreement about that because some of the victims were apparently in favor of the death penalty and some of them were not. So if it was a popularity contest, then you could never have justice because you're never going to satisfy everyone. Justice was done in this case not because of the outcome, but because of the process. The fact that we had 12 people who came in here and gave us their time, who worked hard, who did their best to be fair and impartial, to listen to the evidence, to review the evidence, to consider the evidence, and then to follow the court's instructions of law. They did the best they could to arrive at a decision, and they couldn't arrive at a decision in the end because there was disagreement about what sentence was appropriate. And the law says when you have a death sentence type of scenario, there has to be unanimous agreement. And I think we can all understand why the law requires that. It is the most severe sentence available, and because it involves somebody's life or death, the law wants a unanimous verdict. In this case, you could not have a unanimous verdict, and therefore it is a life sentence. I think Ms. Puso said that after that sentencing verdict that she told, I think, her 9-year-old or a 9-year-old that it wasn't decided yet. That's not true. Once that decision was made, once the jury came back and said they could not reach a unanimous sentencing verdict, the decision was made at that point. The determination was made. It was a done deal. Under the law, that means that it has to be a life sentence. And that was explained clearly here in court. I don't know whether she talked to anyone or not, but that was misinformation. In terms of the system victimizing people again, I disagree with that. I strongly disagree with that. There is nothing about this process that has victimized people again. Now, people may have been traumatized again, and I completely understand that. Yeah. Through this, I understand and I am sensitive to the fact that it is extremely difficult to come in here and to have to testify about the events and later to have to testify about the impact that the crimes had on people's lives. I completely understand that, and I'm in admiration of the courage that people have shown and that the people are showing. But I'm not the one who decided to have this trial. The decision was made, and the trial took place. And if a trial is going to take place, this is what happens. This is how it goes. And it has to be people coming in here and testifying, taking an oath, and taking the witness stand and testifying to tell and taking an oath to tell the truth, and then testifying at that point so that the jury can consider that. That's how the system works. And then at the time of the sentencing hearing in front of the jury, it's an opportunity for people to come in here and tell the jury what impact, what harm the crimes have caused. And that's the way it happened here as well. That doesn't mean it's easy. That doesn't mean that it's not it's not traumatizing to some people. I understand that, but that's the best system we have. And in my humble opinion, it is the best system available. There is no other system like it. And, you know, if I asked you the day before the final sentencing hearing, how many of you thought this was unfair, I bet you wouldn't have gotten very many people who would raise their hand and say it was unfair. And so you can't change your mind the day after just because the result is not what you had hoped or what you had expected. You're always going to have, in an adversarial system, people who are going to disagree with the result. That's the nature of our system. It's an adversarial system. But you can't then claim that there was no justice because it wasn't the outcome that you were expecting. And you can't say, well, this means that the jury did not value the lives of the victims as much as the value of the life, as much as they valued the life of the defendant. This isn't as simple as Ms. Porchot made it seem to be. If it was, we wouldn't need a trial, right? If it was just a matter of somebody killing a bunch of people and injuring severely a bunch of people, and there was nothing more to it, we wouldn't have spent the better part of 7 months in here. Those of you who have followed the proceedings know that there was a lot more to it than that. There was a lot of evidence presented related to mental illness. Now, you can have disagreements on the significance of that evidence or the persuasiveness of that evidence, but the jury heard all that evidence, and the jury was told that it had to make all decisions based on the evidence. So this isn't a simple thing of saying, assume in a hypothetical case that someone kills 12 people and injures 70 others. What do you think is the appropriate sentence for that person, the maximum or something less? It's not that simple. That's not what our system is about, and that's not what was involved here during the trial. What was involved here during the trial was the presentation of a lot of evidence and presentation of arguments and having 12 people who were fair and impartial, having a judge who tried his best to be fair and impartial, to be neutral, to do to do my utmost to apply the law, and then in the end, see what the result was. And that's how you know it was justice. So on that note, we'll take a break for 20 minutes. The court will be in recess. Thank you.
Please rise.